Where do you go after Yugi? After Yami? After Tristan T. Kayla? Why, you expand on the actions and the motivations of a man who flies around in a private jet shaped like a dragon. Perhaps the only character in fiction who can build a school for card games on a haunted island and for it to be completely in character. A lot of people shit on Card Game Island as a dumb idea for a setting, but I've never heard anyone say it was out of character. A man, I remind you, who blew up his last private island. Twice, actually. But still somehow convinced people to send their children here, despite the fact that Duel Academy is fucking haunted. This deserted island is not only a prison for several ancient evil spirits, but also home to a series of hideous occult child kidnappings. Low-key, I suspect that's a feature, not a bug. Kaiba chose the most remote and cursed location on the planet because he's extra like that. Keep in mind, this is the same man whose protagonist got a happy ending in what functions as heaven. A heaven Kaiba uses technology to fucking invade. Not because he wants to mine it for resources or get revenge, but because Yami had a slightly better win ratio at Uno, and he's petty like that. God, I fucking love this show. Anyway, now with GX, a show which takes both the horror and the silliness of the original Duel Monsters manga and cranks them both right up to 11. A show that, if named accurately, would be Judai's Bizarre Adventures, silly fun time on Murder Island. Season 1! Whoosh. I want to tell you about some of the things that happened in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. First of all, Judai's gender-ambiguous sex demon hospitalizes all of his friends. So, he blasts them off into space, and then sets off for high school. Young, dumb, and severely traumatized. He's a Gen Z icon, folks. Look at our poor, sweet idiot. Everything will not be okay, Jaden. You haven't been forced to fight for your life inside of an active volcano yet. Wait, did that happen twice? And don't worry about the sex demon thing or the space thing. Even space cannot contain Yubel, who, as a leather-clad, gender-ambiguous sex demon, is also a Gen Z icon. We arrive on Duel Academy Island, which is lovely besides all the murder, which there is a lot of. A teacher snaps from severe loss and personally singles out Judai as his victim and tries to murder him. What an unlikely and highly traumatic series of events. Sure would suck if that would happen to him 3 different times. That'd be ridiculous. For those of you keeping track at home, that'd be Professor Banner's Underground Alchemy for Minors, Professor Stein's Prolonged Evangelion reference, and Professor Copra's Snake Jamboree. I promise this is a real show, and not the product of feeding an AI a diet consisting only of JoJo's episodes and true crime podcasts. Oh. But don't let his upbeat attitude fool you. Judai's life is a fucking nightmare and will only get worse. We also meet Kronos, who is very queer and the bad guy, but more in the Disney villain fun sense than the actual hateful sense. And besides, it's subverted within the same season, with Kronos beginning his own heroic arc, which we'll get back to later. Kronos is important. Yu-Gi-Oh! GX finishes up its first season as a weirdly ideal successor to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, being both sillier and a bit darker than the actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime itself. This will fade somewhat in Season 2, before being hit by the most sudden shift in tone in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. Well, except in Arc 5, where after hundreds of episodes, decided to dramatically reveal that the ending was shit. Or Arc 5, just can't get away from weird twist. The manga ends with the reveal that it was incest all along. And with that, we come to a close on Season 1, a fun series of silly adventures intercut with all the occult demon summoning and child kidnapping that it could fit in, which I remind you is a lot. Season 2!
As a new student here, I'd rather not stand out.
Then get a new haircut!
We fight a cult, and this happens. So it's Game of the Year right there. Zane, our previous strongest character and resident Itachi-like, leaves school and in a stunning display of realism immediately gets way too into dog collars and masochism.
I discovered the pleasure of pain!
GX does realistic character growth really well. The show went so hard into its 2005 edginess that it rebounded and became emotionally intelligent by mistake, which is also the main subtitle for this series. Ultimately, however, I don't have too much to say about Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Season 2. It's good and fun, but I'm on a deadline and only have so much to talk about, so let's get to the more, Season 3 bits. Season 3! Yeah, this is where it happens. The season has twice as many murderous teachers and 2 more gay shit subplots. The gay and the darkness are turned right up. It's just like being a teenager, but with a much higher density of Ojama Yellow.
Not again! I hate it when he touches lightning!
As mentioned before, another teacher snaps and tries to personally victimize and kill Jaden,
It is even funnier a second time.
being promised that he'll get his dead baby son back as a reward, and Belle does the melting kid thing from Rick and Morty. But 8 years earlier? Rick and Morty Season 2 did not come out in 2015. Christ, I'm old. He said, making YouTube videos about a cartoon from 2006. Not all heroes wear capes, ladies and gentlemen. But I do! They fight.
Fight!
And Jaden wins, because obviously. Then everyone Jaden loves, and also himself, find themselves trapped in a strange, desolate alien world where everyone you know is reduced to an exhausted, hollow husk of their former selves. And the more you exert yourself, the closer you too come to becoming one of them. It's a metaphor, guys. It's a very subtle metaphor for the working world. Did you get it? Did you get GX's very subtle metaphor? Get it? It's part of GX's ongoing theming about confronting adulthood and growing up. See, that's why they introduced Belle in the season, with her standing in as a literal and metaphorical representation of past trauma. And the Desert Dimension is a metaphor for the working world, and that's why they introduced Jesse, because he's part of the ongoing metaphor about maturity and Jaden basically hitting puberty and actually having to confront having feelings for another person. That's why assuming Jesse is a love interest enriches the story, while assuming Asuka's love interest makes it so much worse.
But what's the deal with her hair?
Who cares?
Actually, it's probably good to take a moment to stop here and examine this metaphor a little closer. I think it's a great example of how a metaphor can still be meaningful and impactful to the story, even though it doesn't hold up from every angle. Here, the metaphor breaks down somewhat when the implied solution to the working world is a combination of gay love and German science, which is, I mean, it's not wrong, but it's a bit specific. We also get introduced to Jesse in this season, and it's cute and fun. He starts dressing in leather and announcing his love for Judai, and yeah, being possessed by a sex demon was my excuse in high school too. We all go through that phase. And if any of this is sounding intriguing, I'll probably point you back to my previous video. It was more in detail about Season 3. And because of that, I'm actually just gonna move right along on to Season 4, baby! Ah yes, we're almost there. The Chronos de Resistance. Season 4! Part of the reason I want to make this video was demand, thank you guys, but also I want to touch on some of the topics I didn't cover before. Kronos. Kronos is the topic. I've been hyping up Yu-Gi-Oh! GX for a while. It's a master of emotional storytelling and being really good with its side characters and their development in particular, but haven't really gone into too much detail because GX is a spectacle when looked at as a whole, and it's really funny to watch.
Just because it's expired doesn't mean it's not delicious. Now grab a fork and enjoy yourself.
But now I think it would help to go close and examine one incident that happens in great detail and really get into why the show is so good at what it does. Yeah, I'm sorry if Kronos wasn't your endgame for this video. I'd genuinely love to go into more detail about everything here and make maybe a 2-hour-long video essay about this, but facts are, I just don't have the numbers to support that right now. Hint, hint, guys. Love you. Alright, so why is Kronos the best? Kronos is one of the examples of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX's special treatment of its side characters. Kronos begins as our primary villain, a teacher who desires a school to maintain its reputation as exclusive more than he values nurturing his students. I love my boy, but he is a bad teacher. But then, in one of the first tragic moments of the series, we see Kronos sacrifice himself to protect his students from Camula, an actual vampire. See, Kronos has a fierce pride as an educator and would sooner die before letting any of his students come to harm. So it's clear from the series that this show is really interested in making Kronos a hero overall and giving him a heroic arc. And the easy way to do that is to have someone mention the power of friendship or do something nice for him. Then he immediately will backtrack on his previous assholery and become a good guy. But GX Baby doesn't take that option. Instead, what they do is they take the same character trait, his pride as an educator, that has made him such an ass to our cast, and instead show it in a positive light. It's not that it's truly a good or a bad thing, it's just a thing about him, and sometimes it manifests negatively, and sometimes it manifests positively. And this isn't going to excuse any of his previous actions, or future actions really, but it is going to show that he's a lot more complicated, and his arc isn't about learning not to be hateful or anything like that. Nah, it's more complicated, baby. It's about him learning how to be a teacher, and what that means, and how to channel that in different situations. And we're gonna get to that, but man, I love Kronos so much. He never sacrifices being cool for humor, and he never sacrifices humor to be cool. Kronos is a profoundly silly man, spending a lot of his time getting up to ridiculous antics, only occasionally dipping back into pure badassery or heroic sacrifice. Kronos is a delicious man, like a very queer onion. He's not entirely sweet, and he's not entirely silly, and he's not entirely cool. He has layers to him. God, my metaphor game is strong. Basically the Brandon Sanderson of queer onion metaphors. See, most of what we've talked about now happens in Season 1. Then, for the next 2 seasons, we'll see some development, a little bit in either way. Sometimes he's being a bit of a jerk and trying to make the school more exclusive, and other times he's being heroic and badass again. This is a journey for Kronos, and there's some steps forward and some steps backwards, and it mostly takes place entirely in the background. He has a lot of great moments, but it's not really until season 4, when the show is starting to wrap up all of its side characters, that he finally gets a spotlight episode again, and boy, what an episode! At this point in the season, Kronos has been firmly rooted as a good guy for some time now, with several good duels and heroic sacrifices to his track record. But this show isn't going to go out without giving him the tribute he deserves. This episode, we see Kronos return to his roots as a villain, with him and Judai having to throw down in one final duel, mirroring their first confrontation in episode 1. However, this time, Kronos' motivations are reversed. For season 1, much of Kronos' motivation came from him trying to get Jaden kicked out of Duel Academy, whereas now it's the opposite. He's grown as a teacher and matured a great deal. In any other show, his arc would be complete. He had become a good teacher. He's learned not only how to nurture his students, but also to learn from them. But here we see him take it one step too far. See, his beloved students are finally graduating, and he's not certain how to deal with that. Him and Jaden throwing down for one final time, with Kronos claiming that if Jaden loses, he'll force them all to stay at school and not be allowed to graduate at all. Kronos is lying. Judai knows it, the cast knows it, everyone knows it. Everyone but Kronos. You see, he's introduced as a villain, developed as an antagonist with more complex and positive sides to his personality, completes a soft redemption arc, and becomes a hero, where his motivation is rooted in the very same ideal which drove his villainy, his pride as an educator. Then, in his final feature episode, he briefly overcorrects in the opposite way. Not a fall from grace, not a tragedy, not a hero fall into evil. No, his relapse into what you can describe as villainy is treated with what it is. An overcorrection brought on by the fact he's learned to really love and appreciate his students. They're leaving, they're graduating, they've grown up and they're moving on, and it's happy and beautiful and sad and extremely hard to deal with for everyone involved. Kronos' last moment is a fantastic bombastic tribute to where he started, as a loud, flamboyant, over-the-top and utterly fabulous villain. But the reason this is so satisfying is we're able to see all the kindness that Kronos has learned how to give over these last few seasons return to him. His students understand that this is an overcorrection, that he's not actually going to bar them from leaving. They know Kronos has become a hero who will always put his students first, and they're absolutely happy to humor him in this one last moment. Judai and Kronos finish their duel, and the result is the same as the very first episode. Judai is victorious, and with a smile, Kronos is finally able to accept his defeat. The similarities between this duel and their very first confrontation in episode 1 is finally really able to hammer home to Kronos just how much not only his students have grown, but how much he's grown. That change is coming, and he's finally able to accept it, giving a perfect bookends to this character in the way that he exactly deserves. Flamboyant, over-the-top, dramatic, slightly antagonistic, but ultimately with his students' best intentions at heart. This is why GX is so good as a series. On the surface, it's about light versus dark, but when you get down to any of the characters' personal arcs, it's always more complicated. Kronos does become a great teacher, but it's not through becoming utterly selfless, or generic, or dull. It's about the pride he has as an educator, the same thing that made him a villain. His relationship to teaching is complicated, and even after he's become a fantastic hero, and has been for some time, there's still room for him to overcorrect, make more mistakes. His pride is a facet of his personality that's not meant to be corrected or removed. It's just something he deals with his entire life, sometimes going too far one way, sometimes in another. The finale to his arc isn't about him losing all pride and becoming some weird, washed-out, generic hero Jesus Christ analog. His arc is about embracing his colors, his weird flamboyant over-the-top nature, his weird antagonistic role, his pride as a teacher, but learning how to channel all of them in more positive ways. This is what GX is all about, baby. It talks a big game about dramatic wars between cosmic light and cosmic darkness, but when you get down to what actually motivates any of the characters or any of their arcs, it's always a lot more complicated than that. It's a story about growing up, which is not necessarily a good thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing either. It's just complicated, and everyone deals with it in very different ways. Much as Professor Kronos' fierce pride as an educator is neither a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a him thing. Also, the show has a lot of weird, ambiguous feelings about teachers. I really could go into a lot more detail about how the fact that the only teacher who shows up regularly and is not completely evil is the one who is flamboyantly queer. To cut the whole thing about Asuka's arc, whose goal is to become a teacher and teaching evil clones of herself, and there's a tsunami, and that's how you pronounce tsunami. And maybe I'll go into more detail sometime. I mean, I only really made this episode because last time everyone was so nice and there was so much engagement and likes, wink, 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 wink. Also, it's just genuinely nice to see other people love the show as much as I do. Check your favorite Kiwi gay boy some likes and some comments, and hopefully I can get a chance to make another video. Maybe someday I'll make a really long one about this and actually go into everything in detail. I didn't even touch on any of the BDSM stuff. Oh shit, I forgot about the BDSM stuff. And the space sex demon things, I was gonna get back to that. God. It's a lot. I can't just keep forgetting my train of thought and talking about Kronos for hours in mixed company. Gotta stop doing that.